Hey everyone,
Owen
Owen
here.
here,
And
and I
I was
was
playing
playing
this.
this.
Hold
Hold
on.
on,
What's that? Who's
who's
that?
that?
Is
Is
that
that
is
is
that my
that my
longtime
longtime
friend
friend
Tava
Tava
Ost?
Ostro?
Get
Get
over
over
here,
here,
girl. What
girl!
are you
What are you
doing
doing
hiding
hiding
over?
over?
Hello, I was just hanging out with the Bionicle Dragon,
Yeah.
minding my own
Nah,
business.
I'm
I'm
sorry.
I
sorry.
just had to answer the call.
Honestly,
Honestly,
you
you
had the
had the
answer
instant
call.
call,
And
and
so
so
why
why
don't
don't
we
we
talk
talk
about
about
why
why
we're
we're
gathered
gathered
here
here
today?
today?
It's
It's
not
not
nothing
nothing
Christianity
Christianity
related.
related,
Nothing
nothing
religious. So
religious. So
why are
why
we
are we
here
here
today?
today?
Well, we're here today because of a game that we have both experienced enthusiastically, mind you.
Honestly,
To go in depth, talk about it, and I think you can take it away from here because this
Yeah.
is
yeah.
really connected to your last walkthrough,
It
It
is,
actually.
is,
honestly.
honestly.
So
So,
the
the
game that
game
we're
that
gonna
we're
be
going to be
talking
talking
about
about
today
today
is
is
actually
actually
Julian's
Julian's
first
first
ever
ever
game.
game.
Now
Now,
he is
he
an
is an
up and
up and
coming
coming
developer,
developer,
and this
and this
is
is
actually the
actually the
alpha
alpha
omega
omega
version
version
of the
of the
game.
game.
So
So,
take it
take it
lightly.
lightly,
Don't
don't
give
give
it
it
too
too
much.
much.
But
But
we're
we're
here to
here to
talk
talk
about
about,
the
the
game in
game in
general
general
and
and
a
a
few
few
little
little
tidbits that
tidbits that
you
you
might
might
not
not
have
have
known.
known.
Yes, exactly. Um, with a basic overview of the game before we really dig into those details that are waiting for us, right?
So why
So,
don't
why
you
don't you
go
go
ahead and
ahead and
explain the
explain the
first
first
room?
room?
Right, so the first room that you begin in, it is the opener room, and it really sets the stage for the rest of the game. So basically, you start off in a main room, and behind you is a chest, and then you are given three doors, so three basic options: the left, the middle, and the right. And it seems simple, but it's deceptively simple, mind.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
this
this
game
game
actually,
actually,
I
I
cut this
cut
out
this
for
out
some
for some
reason.
reason.
This
This
game
game
is a
is a
puzzle
puzzle
game.
game.
Now
Now,
it's
it's
sort
sort
of
of
linear,
linear,
but
but
it
it
still
still
is
is
nonetheless
nonetheless
a
a
puzzle
puzzle
game
game
that
that
has
has
its
its
own
own
little
little
challenges
challenges
and
and
quirks
quirks
to
to
it.
it.
So
So,
going
going
through it,
through
why
it,
don't
why
we
don't we
talk
talk
about?
about,
I'm
I'm
gonna
going to
say,
say,
do we
do we
dare
dare
call
call
it
it
a
a
motif?
motif?
What's
What's
like
like
the
the
motif
motif
that
that
everyone
everyone
first
first
notices when
notices
they
when they
start
start
playing this
playing this
game?
game?
I would say the first motif that really crosses the player's path is going to be contrast, especially if they're willing to pay attention. It's something that just immediately jumps out at the player. It was something I noticed right away, and when I say contrast, I specifically made a reference to contrasting dark and light. And it seems kind of trivial and boring and basic, like, oh, this has been done. But really, I think Julian takes it to the next level in this game and utilizes it intelligently.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So
So,
what
what
contrast we're
contrast
talking
you're talking
about
about
is
is
between
between
the
the
items that
items
you
that you
get.
get.
Now,
Now,
if
if
I'm
I'm
correct,
correct,
what does
what
he
does he
call these
call these
items
items
again? I
again? I
think he
think he
just
just
calls
calls
them
them,
no,
no,
not
not
circles.
circles.
Um,
Oh,
what was
what
it
was
one
it
more
one more
time?
time?
Crescents,
Crescents,
right?
right,
Perfect,
perfect,
crescents.
crescents.
So
So,
there
there
are
are
two
two
crescents that
crescents
you can
that you
get
can
in
get in
this
this
game.
game.
Now
Now,
there's
there's
a
a
light
light
one
one,
and there's
and
a
there's a
black one.
black one.
And
And
as
as
you
you
said,
said,
he
he
uses
uses
it
it
pretty
pretty
masterfully.
masterfully.
So
So,
when you
when
go
you go
into the
into the
left
left
room,
room,
it's
it's
not
not
actually a
actually a
room,
room,
more
more
of it's
of, it's
actually a
actually a
cave, and
cave. And
there's no
there's no
lighting in
lighting in
this
this
cave,
cave,
much as
much
it
as it
would
would
you
you
would
would
be
be
like
like
going
going
to
to
Mammoth
Mammoth
Cave, where
Cave,
it's
where it's
basically
basically
100%
100%
pitch
pitch
black. So
black.
you
So
go
you
into
go
this
into this
cave,
cave,
and the
and the
only
only
source of
source of
light that
light
you
that you
see
see
there
there
is
is
going
going
to
to
be
be
that white
that
that
white
white
item
item
that
he
he
puts
puts
there.
there.
So
So
you
you
grab
grab
that,
that,
and
and
you
you
can't see
can't see
anymore. So
anymore. So
you
you
leave the
leave the
room.
room.
So
So
it
it
starts
starts
off
off
with
with
this
this
dark
dark
area,
area,
this
this
cave
cave,
which
which
has
has
no
no
lighting
lighting
in
in
it,
it,
and
and
then
then
continues to
continues to
sort of
sort of
go
go
into
into
a
a
a contrast.
contrast.
What
What
contrast is
contrast is
dark?
dark?
Well,
Well,
white
white
contrast
contrast
black.
black.
So
So,
and
and
then when
then
you
when
go
you go
into
into
the
the
right
right
room,
room,
you're
you're
met
met
with
with
this
this
often
often
white-ish
white-ish
insane
insane
asylum
asylum,
where
where
this is
this
where
is
you
where you
get
get
the
the
second
second
item,
item,
the
the
black
black
crescent,
crescent,
and
and
it
it
contrasts
contrasts
the
the
room.
room.
Everything in
Everything in
that
that
room
room
is
is
white.
white.
And
And
why
why
don't
don't
we
we
continue
continue
there by
there by
talking
talking
about
about
that
that
you
do
want
you
to talk
want to talk
about the
about the
cave, or
cave,
do
or
you
do you
want
want
to
to
talk
talk
about
about
the
the
white
white
room real
room real
quick, or
quick,
do you
or
want
do
to
you
talk
want to
about
talk about
the
the
middle
middle
room?
room?
I think it's finally worth noting the middle room, something that kind of you spend much less time in, but a lot of prominent things happen. And the thing that's particular about this other room, this third room, the middle one, is the fact that the color really isn't specified. They don't talk about darkness, they don't talk about light, and it's referenced more as just a small, stuffy little closet. Something that almost feels like a limbo between the two rooms, almost as they call it, like in a cliche way, a gray area, which I think when we're talking about black and white is a really nice thing to call it. I think it really is a literal and metaphorical middle to these other two.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay,
So
so
then,
then
so
so
now
now
we
we
got
got
the
the
middle
middle
room out of
room
the
out of the
way.
way.
We're
We're
gonna
gonna
go
go
back to
back to
that.
that.
But
But
why
why
don't
don't
we?
we?
Do
Do
you
you
want
want
to
to
start
start
off
off
with
with
the
the
cave
cave
or
or
with
with
the
the
insane
insane
asylum?
asylum?
Personally, I want to start with the insane asylum just because I think that's where most players end up, at least especially probably because I know my first big memory that I made in the game was when I went to the White Room because we're met with something very interesting in the White Room. There is another there's another being in there, a man who is in a straitjacket, if I recall. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
Only his feet are free, but something to note, he's in this straitjacket, white room, it's bright, but he has something with him, something of contrast, which is a crescent, but this time it is a black crescent. So it's the
Mm-hmm.
one contrasting thing I see in this room. And it was very notable. He has this black crescent, white room, and it becomes much more potent once you discover the white crescent in the cave.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Now,
do you
do you
want to
want to
just
just
go
go
over like
over
the
like the
main?
main?
Are we
Are we
going to
going to
go
go
over
over
like
like
the
the
main
main
area
area
of the
of the
game,
game,
or
or
do
do
you
you
want to
want to
start
start
digging
digging
deeper
deeper
and
and
talking
talking
about
about
who
who
this
this
man
man
is
is
and
and
what's
what's
going
going
on
on
in
in
this
this
whole
whole
room?
room?
The main area of the game, do you mean anything in particular,
So
So
do
do
you
you
want
want
to
to
or
continue
continue
like
like
talking
talking
about
about
like the
like the
game?
game?
What
Talk about the
do a
do a
walkthrough
walkthrough
of
of
the
the
so
so
basically
basically
talking
talking
about what
about what
happens in
happens
the
in the
game,
game,
and
and
then
then
go
go
back
back
and
and
start
start
finding
finding
like
like
the
the
real
real
big
big
nitpicks
nitpicks
or
or
like
like
the
the
small
small
details.
details.
start with just an overview of like, this is what you do, here's what you get, and here's
Mm-hmm.
how it goes, and then we'll
Yes.
actually talk about the significant details between.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So
then
then
you
you
actually
actually
can't
can't
get the
get the
Black
Black
Crescent
Crescent
immediately
immediately
if you
if you
try
try
to
to
talk with
talk with
him
him
or
or
if you
if you
something
something
weird
weird
happens.
happens.
But we
We
won't
won't
go
go
into
into
that
that
yet.
yet.
So
So
what you
what you
need
need
is
is you need
an
an
item,
item,
and
and
the
the
item
item
that
that
you
you
get
get
is
is
in the
in the
middle
middle
ground.
ground.
You get
So
it's
it's
actually a
actually a
bottle of
bottle of
spices,
spices,
and you
and you
give
give
this
this
man
man
the
the
bottle of
bottle of
spices, and
spices,
he
and he
does
does
something
something
peculiar.
peculiar.
You
You
can
can
you're
you're
given
given
once
once
you
you
get
get
these
these
spices,
spices,
you're
you're
given
given
the
the
option
option
to
to
give
give
the
as
as
a
a trade.
trade.
I'll
I'll
give you
give
these
you these
spices
spices
if
if
you
you
give me
give
the
me the
black
Black
crescent.
Crescent.
So
So
that's
that's
exactly
exactly
what
what
happens.
happens.
But
But
there's a
there's a
weird
weird
quote
quote
in
in
it.
it.
When you
When you
hand the
hand the
man the
man the
spices,
spices,
he
he
smells them
smells
and
them.
he
He
says
says
like,
like,
"My
"My
home."
home."
So
So
there's
there's
obviously
obviously
something
something
that
that
has
has
to
to
do
do
with
with
this
this
man
man
connecting the
connecting the
spices.
spices.
But
But
we're
we're
gonna
gonna
gloss
gloss
over
over
that
that
for
for
now.
now.
As you
As you
grab the
grab the
second
second
crescent,
crescent,
the
the
next
next
part
part
of the
of the
game
game
is
is
in the
in the
middle
middle
room
room
where
where
you
you
get
get
the
the
gemstone. And
gemstone.
why
And why
don't
don't
you
you
talk
talk
about
about
that?
that?
So about the gemstone, what about the
Hmm.
other crescent?
Oh, the
Oh,
other
the other
crescent.
crescent. I
Alright.
mean,
There's
there's
nothing
nothing
really
really
too
too
bad
bad
about that.
about that.
It's
It's
just
just
in the
in the
cave.
cave.
It's
It's
the
the
importance
importance
of
of
the
Crescent,
the
black
dark
Black
crescent.
Crescents.
cave, you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
grab it,
There's
There's
nothing.
honestly.
nothing.
There's
There's
nothing
nothing
really
really
good
good
there.
there.
You
You
can
can
choose
choose
to
to
stay
stay
in the
in the
room,
room,
but
but
nothing
nothing
really
really
bad
bad
happens.
happens.
Right, so talking about the gem now. So when
Well,
How,
we
how do you
how do
how
you
do you
get the
get the
gem?
gem?
Why don't we
Why don't
talk
we
about
talk
how you
about how
get
you
the
get the
gem?
gem?
obtaining both the crescents, I'm sure this isn't much of a big surprise, but other things about this game are a surprise. It seems almost too simple, but obviously, as we talk about it later, we'll explain. But you get the two crescents, and you return back to this middle room, this ground, this closet, this little limbo between these strange worlds that you've been entering. And there are these two slits in the wall, actually, that you are able to notice earlier, affecting the room when you go in. So obviously, these are prominent. The you notice
Hmm.
right away as a player. You use the crescents through the slit open, and there is a like a red gem inside of this cloud. We can specify more about that if we want to. Do
But
you
we'll
But
go
we'll
into
go
want to
into
that
talk
that
later.
more
later.
about?
Let's
Let's
go
go
into
into
our
our
gem
gem
later.
later.
But
But
we
we
should
should
also
also
talk
talk
about that
about
this
that.
is
This
the
is the
only
only
point in
point
the
in the
game where
game where
color
color
is
is
mentioned,
mentioned,
other
other
than the
than the
white
white
rune,
rune,
bright
bright
crescent,
crescent,
and the
and the
black
black
crescent,
crescent,
which
which
is
yeah,
we're
we're
not
not
going
gonna
to
go into
we're not
we're
going
not
to
gonna
go
go
into
into
the
the
whole
whole
thing
thing.
that's
It's
like
like
it's
it's
white and
white and
black
black
color.
color.
But
But this is like
the only time where color is actually
mentioned
mentioned
throughout
throughout
the
the game.
game.
They don't talk about the color of anything else. The chests that you seeing in the beginning, they don't talk about the color of that. They don't talk about the color of the spices.
Hmm.
Nothing. They don't talk about anything but whiteness, black and white. And then suddenly we're hit with red, very striking color too. My
Exactly. So
Exactly.
it's
So
like
it's like
you
you
grab
grab
this
this
red jewel,
red jewel,
and
and
let's just
let's
go
just
into
go in.
so
So
what
what
type
type
of
of
how
how
have
have
you
you
been
been
able?
able?
Oh,
Oh,
we
we
can't
can't
go
go
into
into
how
how
we
we
know
know
what
what
the
the
jewel
jewel
is
is
yet.
yet.
not until we finish
Yeah,
this.
not
Then
until we
we'll
finish.
talk about it.
Exactly.
Then
Then
we'll
we'll
talk
talk
about it.
about it.
So
So
then
then,
once you
once you
have the
have the
gem,
gem, you're able to open up the.
you're
You're
able to
able to
finally
finally open up
the
the
chest.
chest. You know,
You
you
sort of
sort of
trade
you
the
trade the
two
two
crescents
crescents
for
for
this
this
gem.
gem.
So
So
giving
giving
up
up
these
these
two
two
crescents,
crescents,
you
you
achieve
achieve
the
the
gem.
gem.
You're
You're able to put it in the chest,
and
and it opens
to
up to
give
give
you
you
a
a
surprising
surprising
message
message
that
that you have. In fact, congratulations,
you
you
beat the
beaten the
game.
game.
What
What
you
you want me to tell you what's in the chest?
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
I'm
I'm
not
not
creating
creating not to tell you what's in the chest, and it ends on sort of a nice and silly note, or that's what the viewer thinks. Now, why don't we go and tell him what we were able to figure out about this game?
Well, we're able to figure out a lot of lore surrounding this game, as well as what this lore means for some of the other more hidden details, I'd say. Things that are um, very subtle conclusions, but very intense conclusions that can be made. I want to talk about that kind of lore that
Yes.
okay, so things we've just deduced from this game is oh god.
So playing this game, you may think that it's. Sorry about that. We had a bit of a power outage right there. So what we want to talk about was how he utilizes grammar in a magnificent way. So Julian doesn't put any sentences really at the end of it. So you leave. So when you're done putting in the presents, if you choose to stay, it's just like there's nothing else to do. So you leave the closet alone, and there's no period there. So signifying that there's. Or, why don't you continue? So it doesn't signify that there's an end. So what is he trying to talk about?
Okay, well, when there's a lack of periods, it's a very significant grammatical choice. I look at English a lot. I study English. I read a ton. I am constantly enthralled in English. It's been something like a stronghold of mine. And that's definitely a very powerful grammatical choice. When there is no period, then the sentence doesn't end. It continues forward. Is for reasons that we will be able to emphasize later on and really discuss. Whether you know it or not, the game is actually forcing you along. It is pulling you along. It is not letting this end yet. There is not an end yet. So lack of period is almost a figurative representation of continuously moving through the game. This is not done yet. Like, continue pushing forward. You do not get that period until towards the end when you see very almost actions. That is when we see the period arrive, when we see things really ending, almost like a wrap up. So Julian makes very wisely, but very subtly, this kind of push that is more bluntly emphasized by other elements of the game. Um, very, I'd say, impactful because I read it much more in a rush. I read it much more just continuing, continuing. But when I actually noticed when a sentence had a period, that's when I think it really hit me that, oh, he shows where the stops are. He shows where the completion is, and then he shows where the anti-completion is.
Exactly. So then now that we sort of highlighted what the game's about, how the dev actually works the game into creating a sort of fast linear environment with everyone else. So why don't we go on and talk about who the man in this insane asylum is? 'Cause I think that's like one of the drawing features that's in this game. Like, what's this man doing here, and why is he here? And we were actually took a while, but we were able to finally figure this out. So why don't you talk about on the topic of not conflict. Tough to see. I'm totally having a big brain fart here.
Yes, I believe in you. I believe in you.
Let's say it. Contrast. On topic of contrast, right? So we're talking about contrast, right? So you look at the man, right? And so like I talked about in my walkthrough, I gave a little hint about this in my walkthrough. So there's contrast in this room. So we know that this man is probably not white, because if he's going for the continues to go for the contrast, it would work better for the storyline and everything else. I know there are no descriptive words, and I think this is what really leads it into like how he's a master plan at this, because it's pretty. You have to assume that he's continuing with this contrast play that he's been going with for the entire game. Like, this contrast has been used the entire game. So you assume that this man is, of course, going to be darker in skin tone. And then you also assume that he's not going to be European, as I hinted. No one in Europe actually uses spices. They spent their entire life trying to conquer the world to get spices, but they didn't like them in the end. So we were actually able, through deductive reasoning, and which we will explain in really high depth later, that this man is from Kenya. And not only is he from Kenya, but he is. Why don't you tell him where he is from Kenya?
After a lot of different kinds of analysis, hypothesizing, going back and forth, cross-checking different data, and generally looking again and again at what we were presented with in the game, Kenya, we wanted to go deeper than obviously just generalized country. I think Julian, well, we know Julian left more to it than just Kenya, because as we found out, Julian is very detail orientated, so he wouldn't just stop at Kenya. By going further in, a specific location called Doldol in Kenya was where we were able to really track down the epicenter of geographic narrative.
Now, before we continue, there is a point in Kolkol that I just want to emphasize right now. So there are only a few areas of interest in Kolkol. There's the pub, there are the three schools throughout, and then there's one more part. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's sort of a diner, but it's in a plainy area, and I think that's where the detail really needs to be squashed down. But we'll come down to that. So Dole isn't very needed, but it is persistent in the storyline of this, in the lore, in the storyline of this. So just keep it in the back of your head that this man is from Kenya, specifically Dole.
Exactly. Into next, do you want to tie into man in the insane asylum?
Let's talk. So yeah, why don't we tie to that?
So like we said before, he's reminded of home. I think very much depends on the spices, the assorted spices, what spices are being assorted here.
Yeah, so why don't we talk more about the man in the insane asylum and how the spices tie into that?
All right, so insane asylum, spices, and he takes it with his foot and is reminded of home. And so much so that he's willing to actually give up this crescent and just daydreams with the sense of the spices. We currently don't have enough information on the assorted spices to figure out what are actually in this bundle. So I feel like
we really tried. I think we came close to thinking that it was a mix of cinnamon and rosemary, but we just didn't feel comfortable, being like, this is it. We didn't have enough of that. Unlike everything else here, we didn't have enough background information to actually decide what the spices were.
So many other things that we could really figure out through what Julian was giving us, but in this specific case, it was something that we just couldn't quite confirm. And hopefully, maybe if we're lucky, we'll get follow-up information from Julian, or maybe he'll add something that'll allow us to really figure that out.
Yeah, definitely. And so now that we know, so I want to talk more about this. So this man wasn't a. Of course, he wasn't. He's not this being here, right? And you sort of have to go. This is not a long shot though, but we have to assume that you sort of materialized here. There's no exit. There are only four. There are only three doors in this room, and there's no exit. So just like this man, you are materialized here. So we were actually able to figure this out through some AR gameplay, so augmented reality gameplay from this game. Sadly it's been taken down. It was on a Facebook page. I tried getting a bunch of screenshots of it, but sadly I wasn't able to. We were able to deduce. We still don't know this man's name, sadly. But so what ended up happening was when this man went to Okalu, I think that's what the area's name is. He found a termite hill, and what happened on the termite hill is that he was found, or maybe was given. We don't really know. So he was able to come into contact with this black, crescent. And when he came in contact with this black crescent, he was moved to this area of this room, to which we don't know exactly why. We do know exactly why, but we'll tell you at a later date. He actually put himself into that situation where he's in that sand asylum, where he's in that very bright area. So there's actually a reason behind this contrast in the game. And now I think we've been going past it. We talk about the one stickler people have with this game. That's the crashes. And we actually found out that the crashes aren't unintentional. They're actually intentional. Julian put them in the game intentionally. So it's a way to further the story. And why don't we talk about the villain of this game?
So obviously, if the crashes are intentional, well then, what purpose do they serve? Well, let me tell you something pretty interesting. Looking into this game further, so Owen and I really, we actually explored all the different ways that the game can crash. Once again, looking back at the contrast, looking back at purpose, cross analysis of different elements of the game, we figured out the crashing is actually linked to some kind of villainary force, something negative. We're just going to call it baseline a type of monster. Easier for us just to use the context of monster. And this monster is very much tied into the crashes of this game. The crashes are one of the elements it's able to use. It actually uses multiple elements in the game, but main thing that you will be confronted with throughout the game is the crashes. The crashes are basically one of its tools, as kind of said. Remember with the no periods, the forcing you along. are that thing, one of those things that forces you along throughout the game. You make the wrong choice, not only do you not continue, you just crash, start
Mm-hmm.
over. Basically, is what's happening here.
And so we wanted to figure out, well, why is this a monster crashing the game? And we figured out that it's tied to the Black Crescent. Now, if you get the Black, I didn't show this in my walkthrough, sadly, but if you get the Black Crescent and you head back into the left room, the one with the white crescent, you will feel a sort of pulsating feeling from this crescent. And this is where it gets really interesting, is that if you follow it, or your character sort of forced to follow it, this is an urge, and if you obey this urge, you actually die. So you're consumed. The game's words, not mine. You are consumed by the darkness, and this is what led us on to the first idea that there's definitely a monster in here, and it wants the Black Crest, but we just couldn't figure out what if he wants the Black Crest, then why does he let us go the first time? What's the point of this white crest? Is it just another contrasting thing? But we don't think it is. And why don't you elaborate on this?
All right, so obviously, as we told earlier, there's a white crescent in there, and it originally served as contrast. It seemed just as valid as the black crescent, although for some reason this white crescent is perfectly unprotected. It is left in this dark cave where you will die if you hang out there too long with the black crescent. But obviously, you need the white crescent to get the gem. So it plays a role, but it's ominously left unguarded and almost too easy, and you can't stick around for long. Well, that's because Owen and I figured out that this white crescent real like the black crescent is. The black crescent plays a real role. It is something meaningful and powerful in this game, and as we know, the monster definitely wants it. Crescent bait, actually. This is something that is being utilized to pull you in, necessarily to die in the cave. No, 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 no. Basically, by getting the white crescent, two ways to get towards the black crescent, as we know, one through your death, because then there's a free black crescent, and one through the trade off, because you need the white crescent in the trade.
And this is what leads us into our next thing. So we also taking an idea that this man is from Kenya, we were able to figure out what the gem is. The gem is sort of a mineralistic form of ruby that could be found in the cave, something that the monster could bargain with. And what happens is, so when you figure this out, that the monster really only wants this black crescent, well then the meaning of the treasure starts to take a little bit of a skewed meaning. That ending word, I wasn't creative enough to put anything in here, so you just had to deal with a lack of closure. Well, now it feels like you were used. So picture this, right? So you have an item that you want, and someone else has items that they want. But you can't look each other directly in the eye. You have to give them this penny or whatever they want, and they can give it to you. But whoever gives it first, whoever gives it their items first, the other person isn't really obligated to give you their item, or they give you the item that they promised you. They can keep it and just walk away. And that's the idea. We figured out that whenever you die, it's the developer talking to you. That isn't its chief. Do you want to try again? Because he lets you finish. He lets you quit the game. But what happens in this last part is it's not the dev talking to you, it's the monster. The monster's already gotten his item from you, and so now you're sort of put into the situation, or he's put into a situation where he doesn't have anything to give you. There's nothing for this in you, and if you open it up, you're killed and faced with a reset. There's not a crash. So obviously this was the dev's intention, but the dev loses control at the end of the game. There is no dev, it's only the monster.
Basically, that in the beginning, the first time I played this game, I thought that the end was a fourth wall break. The dev had officially just messed with me. I was like, oh, great, Julian, I feel played. But I was played thinking that it was the dev talking to me. Because, as Owen said earlier, with the death, when we die, we are perfectly allowed to quit the game. We can say no, and we read that it's cool, it's fine, we can stop. When the game crashes, it run again, again. Oh, this treasure chest having nothing in it, especially after doing the bartering, which the bartering of the crescents with the gem, I think is actually something that happens between you and the monster.
Mm-hmm.
A definite barter so that it can get the black crescent and you can get this gem, and then you think you've won. It is very much a ploy set up by.
Exactly, and this might let segue into something else. If you so dare to re-enter the room, like we talked about, if you re-entered the room with the black crescent, you would get sucked into darkness. But what happens if you re-enter the black? What happens if you re-enter the cave with the gem? Well, it's interesting because while he has no reason to let you go, they have no reason to continue the game. So you get the same text. You get this black crescent pulsating and pulling you closer into the cave. It's the same exact text, but it takes on a different sort of a skewed meaning. It's no longer in your pocket. It's no longer in your hand, but the monster now holds it and is using it as a way to pull you in, so it can just finish up its work. There's no more reason for you to be there, so there's no reason to let you go any further.
You get the treasure and the game ends, hoorah, or you go back to the cave without going to the treasure and the monsters figures pull you back in, because if you're playing the game, you have the jewel, you have not experienced death in the cave from the crescent. So the
Mm-hmm.
monster figures, if I use this crescent pull, I'm aware of what happens, and I'll just end their life there and stop the game, basically end the game there. So you think it's the same text, but basically the text never specifies where the crescent is. And say that the crescent in your pocket, crescent in your hand. It just uses the crescent as an overarching, it's pulsing, it's drawing you in. So there's definitely a very subtle shift, but a real shift at the same time in where is it located in the cave, what's it doing to you, who's using it.
And I think at this point, we talk about crashing. I really just want to come back to this. So we talked about how this entity or monster uses crashing to sort of control you, to keep the game going. But why would it crash at the certain points it does? Now, we figured out a few points. So we know it crashes when you ask the insane man just to give you the crescent. Can you highlight? I don't remember. Okay, it crashes if you don't exit the closet. It crashes if you look at the chest continued. So if you decide to stay by the chest, it will crash as well. And it will crash if you
Basically, asking for the crescent directly,
Mhm.
staying in the closet, and staying by the chest.
So then why don't you go into theory, because I've been talking I'm talking a little bit too much. Why don't you go into detail about why he is using why he's crashing us in these certain areas?
So I'm gonna start like kind of in order. So if you stay in the closet after getting the spices, it crashes. This is basically, at least as how we've deduced it, this is a way to thing because
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? The mic cut out. Just talk gibberish for 2 seconds and then just talk in like a coherent stream.
hold one moment. There's movement. All right. So three crashes specified. We have seen that all three have their own specific things going for them. Some important things to note are when the monster wants to rush you or when the monster wants to prevent player knowledge. Two main driving forces we see. So when you spend extra time in the closet, the game crashes. And if you stay around the chest, game crashes. And if you ask for the crescent, game crashes. I'll just reiterate that because it feels necessary. If you stay in the closet for extra time, what are you doing? You're not rushing the game anymore. You're not following that idea of no periods in the sentences. You are spending extra time looking where you're not supposed to be looking, which is the bartering ground for the monster. It basically is a time waster, and the monster's not having that. So obviously, game crash. That way, okay, not doing that again. I'm just gonna skip that, get the spices, and go. So it really helps the monster there, drive you forward. But then player knowledge. This is important. So, if you look at the chest too long, you might accidentally discover something like there's nothing in the chest as revealed at the end, such as when I believe you force a chest open. Um, you have experience forcing the chest open, Owen. I have not done that in the playthrough. You did it quite extensively.
Hmm.
Could you talk more about that,
So
actually?
what happens is you're hit with an alarm of
alarm of
some
some
point.
point.
So
So
when you
when you
actually end
actually
up
end up
opening up
opening
the
up the
chest
chest
and
and
it
it
does
does
open
open
up,
up,
you're
you're
not
not
granted
granted
the
the
knowledge
knowledge
of
of
what's in
what's
the
in the
chest.
chest.
It
It
says the
says the
chest
chest
opens,
opens,
but then
but
an
then an
alarm
alarm
comes and
comes
you're
and you're
buried by
buried
a
by a
bunch of
bunch of
rubble.
rubble.
So
So
obviously
obviously
that,
that
you're not
you're not
hit by
hit
a
by a
crash,
crash,
but if
but
you
if
were
you were
to,
to,
at that point, the
the
dev,
dev
that was
that was
meant,
meant
the
the
dev
dev
killed you
killed you
off.
off.
The
The
dev
dev
didn't
didn't
wait and
want
be
you
like,
to
oh,
be like,
he's
oh,
gonna
he's gonna
force the
force
line.
the line.
It's just an easy win. That's
That's
sort of
sort of
stupid.
stupid.
So
So
that was the
that was the
devs,
devs,
but
but
the
the
monster
monster
doesn't
doesn't
know
know
what the
what the
dev
dev
knows.
knows.
The
The
monster is its
monster's
own
its own
entity. It
entity. It
doesn't
doesn't
know
know
this
this
information.
information.
So
So
it
it
knows that,
knows
oh,
that, oh,
maybe he
maybe he
can
can
force the
force the
chest
chest
open
open
and
and
not feel
not
any
feel any
consequences.
consequences.
So
So
let's push
let's
him
push him
along.
along.
So it
So it
crashes the
crashes the
game
game
right
right
there,
there,
hoping
hoping
that you
that you
don't
don't
try to
try to
force it
force it
open.
open.
And that's
And that's
exactly what
exactly what
happens.
happens.
So,
So
you
you
aren't
aren't
granted
granted
any
any
information
information
when you
when you
if
if
you
you
do
do
end up
end up
breaking it
breaking it
open.
open.
But at
But
the
at the
same
same
time,
time,
it's the
it's the
monster
monster
doesn't
doesn't
know
know
that
that
the
the
monster
monster
doesn't know
doesn't
what
know
the
what the
dev
dev
knows,
knows,
basically.
basically.
Right, because basically, as far as I got was I just stayed along for the ride. I said to look at the chest, and then I got a crash. It didn't want me even around that chest because there's nothing in there ultimately. So it's a big thing of player knowledge. But a more interesting and less obvious thing is when we go to ask the man directly, "Hey, can I have the crescent?" Let's say you don't want to offer the spices or you don't know about them yet. Maybe he's the first room you've gone to. When you ask, it crashes. Now, let's face it, we know that he has put himself in this state. He knows something about the crescent we don't. What could happen asking him about the crescent? Well, a few things. He may be able to tell you something we don't know about the crescent that he knows, the monster knows, etc. There could be a reason that he doesn't want to give it up. Maybe that's why he's so willing to lock himself away to be in this insane asylum area. So it's very much like a monster doesn't want to even give you a chance to really know anything
Hmm.
about what you're doing.
So
So
then,
then
wait,
wait,
so
so
why
why
has this
has this
man put
man put
himself
himself
into
into
a
a
white
white
room?
room?
Is it
Is it
something
something
about,
about
the
the
monster?
monster?
Ah, yes. So remember when you spoke about when you have the Black Crescent in the Darkness Cave, you know how that is when the Crescent is able to really activate and lure you in?
Yes.
Yes.
So essentially, the only way to avoid that possibility, the crescent does not pulse or glow or draw you anywhere until you're in the darkness. Where's the opposite of darkness? In the light. Then we see this man. He is in a white room. It's light, insane asylum esque, and he's also protecting himself with a straitjacket. He is very much trying to stay in a place the monster cannot access, even if he is 100% alone. He is in a place where the crescent has no power over him. It will not kill him. And he's in a place where the monster obviously has no real claim. The monster has its most claim in the cave, I would say, and then probably some kind of various ability in the other rooms, but definitely not in the room with the man.
Okay,
Okay.
okay,
Okay.
okay,
Okay.
okay,
Okay.
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 So,
So,
I'm
I'm
sorry to
sorry to
interrupt you.
interrupt you.
What was
What
the
was the
point? Can
point?
you
Can you
continue on
continue on
about your
about your
previous
previous
point?
point?
Oh, my bad, sorry. So simply put, iterate my previous point. I have terrible, terrible memory.
One second.
Second.
Okay,
Okay.
we
We
had a
had a
we made
we
a
made a
little
little
paper for
paper
this.
for this.
This is because we
Because
knew
we
it was
knew
gonna
this was gonna
happen, so
happen,
we
so
made
we
a
made
little
a
paper
little
for it.
paper
Let
for
me
it.
Yeah.
Let me
just
just
let's just
let's
look
just look
into it.
into it.
We're talking
Talking
about
about
the
the
Because I know we were speaking on Crash for Crescent.
yes,
yes,
crash
crash
crescent.
crescent.
Yes.
Yes.
So
So
there's
there's
information
information that
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 the
the
monster's
monster's
trying to
trying to
withhold
withhold
from
from
you.
you.
Is there
Is there
anything
anything
else?
else?
So is there,
Is there
other than
other than
information? Because we just
information?
talked
Just
about
talk
the
about the
information
information
part.
part.
Is
Is
there
there
any
any
other
other
reason
reason
why
why
the
the
monster
monster
would want
would
to
want to
crash you
crash
there,
you
or is
there,
it
or is it
just
just
information
information
based?
based?
Well, considering that basically, if you were to ask for the Crescent, I think straight up, not offer anything of yourself, talk, distracted. He could say, "No, I need it here, this room," and then it expounds upon, "Oh, there, you can't go in the darkness because monster, or because whatever happens to the Crescent in the darkness." It also will prevent you from going into the cave or staying in the cave, or maybe even completing the game itself. If you don't
Hmm.
complete the game, who doesn't get the Black Crescent? The
The
monster.
The
monster.
monster.
Basically, that's my angle. If you have anything to add, go for it.
So
So
also
also
continuing
continuing
that,
that.
It's the reason why you use spices to get him. So we don't know how long this man has been here for. Presumably he's been here for years, maybe decades. So by using the spices, he's been in the situation of loneliness where he just doesn't have anything to do with his life. He's sitting here, he's protecting, he's guarding this area. And so by giving him spices, what you end up doing is you stop him. How it works is...
So how it works in the end is... So he's reminded of home when he gets spices. So it's sort of anti-intuitive. The monster's giving you these spices because he knows that if he's reminded of home, he'll forget about everything and he'll just want to remember. He's never been back home after so long. He only wants this this moment, and that definitely encapsulates it. So that's the reason why the spices work. It's because he's not thinking straight. He's gone insane because he's put himself into this situation. So by having something to remind him of his home, he won't worry about the crescent. He's caring about his home, not the crescent.
Right, exactly. That was a really good point to make.
And I think that I think we have a point on the back page that we haven't talked about.
Let's see. Yes, you can hear the flipping of my massively overwritten on page. For the back, about the text repeat about how it has a separate context when you go in.
Oh yeah, we are
on
talking
the
about
cave. Let's see if there's anything interesting. I have a lot written on this paper, everybody. So
yeah, just give us a second. We tried going in order, but it didn't. We sort of like ta ta ta.
I think it's interesting that the crash when we were discussing the crashing when you asked for crescent, I like how there's really it leaves only like one good choice every time. It's either, crashes. It's just a reiteration of this idea of forcing along. Because also get a chance to learn more about anything, it very much just discourages the player from even trying again. It's very much like a spray bottle on the bad cat, They're not doing it again. I think it's an effective task, and I think it's an interesting mechanism to be used. Well, in a few games I guess I've seen crashes used before, but nothing as genuine as you actually have to start the game over.
Yeah.
So Julian really did an interesting job, really putting together such a I don't even know.
Oh, you know what we didn't talk about yet? The fourth wall breaks. So we talked about like how the last one wasn't a fourth wall break, but the last one, but isn't there? There's not. If you end up dying in the cave, whether it's by the Black Crescent or by the monster who has the Black Crescent who draws you in, you get this message that that you've lost all plot armor.
Oh yes, the plot armor. That's a very interesting thing to talk about. That was like a small detail that we noticed, but we were trying to look at it. Is this a fourth wall break? Is this possibly just the dev saying like, "Oh, we're out of plot armor, ha ha ha," or like, is this something more? Is this something hidden? Do you want to touch on that?
So looking into it, we go in this plot armor. So we have no more plot armor. Meaning it's been used up. So this character's already been, or you have already been saved. So there's a reason why you're here, and the reason you're here is to fulfill, or So what my theory is on the subject is that, or actually not theory, but actually like looking in the game's code, I figured this out, that you're not here for the monster's wishes. That you're not here to get the Black Crescent, but there's supposed to be something in the treasure chest. But you never find that out because the monster doesn't have anything. This is supposed to be an entirely different game, but it's sort of hijacked. It's not hijacked, but the dev makes it seem like it's been hijacked by the monster.
Right, exactly. So when you're out of plot armor, you're out of what it appears to be acceptable in the game anymore.
So I think we've pretty much touched on all the lore of the game, and that's just the beginning. That's just all that we were able to get out of. There's a monster, it's using you for something, and I think that this lore can really easily segue into a great MMORPG. What do you think about? Is this a different point?
Before we get to that, just something I want to ask because if I am recalling correctly, um, when leaving the closet with the mineralized ruby form,
Oh, you're
um,
correct.
and when it says you leave alone, does it also say that you I might be completely out of my head right now. Again, poor memory, everybody. Um, you leave the closet alone. Phrase, you leave the closet alone. And that you
So
Your mics are cut out there, and I'll pick it up for anyone who couldn't hear you. So she's talking about two different ways you can say it. You leave the closet alone, as in you leave it alone, like you're done with the closet. You're just like, yeah, there's no reason to do that. I'll leave it alone in the corner, or you leave it alone. You left it, but there was someone else with you, and that further brings up the idea that the monster's there. The monster is bargaining with you. It's just, yeah, that's Ruby. Just give me the crescent I want. And we should also, I don't think we talked about this enough. I'm gonna talk about it one more time. This white crescent is bait. It's used by the it's unguarded, like you said, it's unguarded. No one's using it. It's out there. It's bait. So it's the idea of the white crescent. There's something else to this. If you get the other crescent, then maybe you can get the treasure. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So it's bait used by it has holds no real power. Basically, is all we're saying.
wait.
So like I was saying, this look at this lore. There's a lot to be. What's this monster? Where did this? What was this man's family? Why did the spices remind him of home and not something else? And I think this lore can really easily be brought up into the idea that he was hoping for a text-based MMORPG, which I feel is absolutely amazing.
I would be so on board with that. Would love to see more Julian's work. If he can do just this in a small linear puzzle game, I can't even imagine what he would do if he really brought this to a full-scale area. Definitely.
Yep, and I think that's that's all the time we have. Anyway, thank you guys for coming in and watching our little lore episode. We really hope you know this has been days in the making. We have been working on this nonsense. We know the game just came out 2 days ago, right? And there might be a few plot holes. Yes, you left the room alone, or you left it alone. That's a little bit iffy. But we are sure about many things, like the man is from Kenya. Where the town that he's from. What was it? What?
No.
Yeah. Glowed.
Things. Definitely examining different, like I said, key elements, core elements, going over information, words were given, grammar, really relentlessly from the moment this came out, just diving into what's said in the words and what's said between those words too.
Yeah. Anyway, is there any final statements that you would like to say before we leave?
I would just think overall to push this game further, to take this somewhere else, to bring more to it, because that's what I'm waiting for. I've had so much fun in just the littlest amount of plot that I know adding any more would be awesome. That's
yeah. And just so you know, Julian, if you're watching this, we really do like your game, and we wish that you would create more. Ready? We both paid $500. Actually, Tava here paid over $6,000 for the early access game.
Such a mess, but I gotta support my small creators. Indie is life.
Honestly. Anyways, thanks for watching. Tava, thank you for coming in and talking about the lore of the game with us. Anyways, we'll see you guys in the next episode of Lore Bunters.
Adios.